Air Legend is reputed to be one of Europe's top warbird air shows, and this year's show starred a healthy contingent from Red Bull and a tribute to the Korean War, alongside modern military performers and novelty aerobatic acts. Welcome to Melun, on the southern outskirts of Paris. This sprawling airport was used by the Luftwaffe in the Second World War, then by the Americans, and later by Dassault as a flight test base. An airport with an illustrious past, now home to an extraordinary air show. Let's take a look at the lineup and running order. We start with some lighter acts and aerobatic performers, including the newly recrowned World Aerobatic Champion Florent Oddon. Then the show is formally opened and we get stuck into the action proper with some French Army helicopters, the jet pits, and then the first of the warbirds. Among them a rare AT-11 and a newly restored P-40. The Flying Bulls provide a 3-ship aerobatic display and their beautiful DC-6. Other than that, the latter part of the programme is mostly dedicated to the Korean War, and then we round things out with Patrouille Tranchant and the A400M. Unfortunately, the lineup was a little depleted. Not much of note from the French Air and Space Force, nothing at all from the Navy, and a lack of UK warbirds due to a clash with the Duxford Battle of Britain airshow, so the organisers had to use a considerable amount of imagination to bring together some other civilian performers that could broaden the show's appeal beyond hardcore warbird aficionados. Many of those less typical acts flew in the morning, among them this Pipistrel Velis Electro, the first fully certified electric aircraft. With 50 miles of endurance, the Velis is a truly viable electric training aircraft for short cross-country trips and for circuit training. Next up, an Alouette 2, and although it's called the Alouette 2, this is actually the first production variant of the Alouette. Designed and built here in France, the Alouette 2 first flew in 1955, and it was still in production some 20 years later. In all, over 1,300 have been built, and they were used in a military capacity by well over 30 nations. One country, Tunisia, still uses them today. An unusual duo here, Nicolas Charmont in his CJ-01 mini-jet and Olivier Battisti in a TB-30 Epsilon. The Epsilon is a French-designed military training aircraft usually used for basic jet training. It first flew in 1979, but it originally handled quite badly and needed substantial modification before it was ready to enter production. The French Air Force was the largest user of the Epsilon, but retired the type in 2019, releasing a large batch of aircraft onto the civil market. The type continues in military service in Portugal, Senegal and Togo. Now it's the turn of the CJ-01 minijet, a customised version of the BD-5 microjet. With a wingspan of less than 7 metres, this is the world's smallest and lightest series production jet-powered aeroplane. The T-28 Trojan is a popular warbird in France, not least because of France's long association with this aircraft type. Although it's most famous as a trainer and occasionally as a light attack platform for the US military, France used a customised combat-capable version of the T-28, known as the Fennec, for close air support missions in Africa. This particular aircraft is a T-28B, the standard training version operated by the US Navy. It's equipped with a 1,425 horsepower Wright 1820 radial engine, but no tailhook, as this particular variant was used exclusively at land bases and did not need to be carrier capable. The Gazelle was designed as the successor to the Alouette 2 that we saw earlier, and it was manufactured extensively from 1967 up until 1996. Well over 1,700 Gazelles have been built, and they've been operated by almost 30 nations, most of which still retain the type in active service today. That includes the French Army, who still have around 80 Gazelles in service. This particular Gazelle is on the civil register. It's an SA-342M variant, an anti-tank version produced for the French Army, which could be armed with 4 guided anti-tank missiles. There were several high-profile aerobatic performers at Air Legend this year. First up, Tommy Douillard in his Extra 330 SC. Tommy is the reigning world aerobatic champion at the advanced level, the second tier of competition, and last month he participated in the World Aerobatic Championships at the unlimited level and finished in 8th place. He was part of an extraordinary French domination at the World Championships this year. Of the top 10 aerobatic pilots in the world currently, 7 of them are French. Unsurprisingly, the current world aerobatic champion is another Frenchman, Florent Oddon, who flies for the French Air and Space Force's competition aerobatics unit, the Équipe de Voltige. In fact, Florent has won the last 2 consecutive championships, making him the first Frenchman in history to win multiple world titles. And when you look at his airshow performances, it is not difficult to see why. This is the most complex, action-packed and aggressive airshow routine you'll ever see. And it's clear just how hard Florent is pushing the aircraft to do things that it really doesn't want to do. Watch the smoke during this negative G Lomshevak as strange aerodynamic forces carry it sideways across the entire span of the wing. While French pilots are the dominant force in world aerobatics, the Extra Aircraft Company is the dominant constructor. Their Extra 330 SC has now won 6 world titles on the trot, and was the aircraft of choice for more than 2/3 of the athletes in this year's competition. Take a look at this extraordinary manoeuvre as Florent reaches the apogee of a vertical climb and performs 2 3/4 somersaults end over end. This will be followed by 2 examples of the Cobra manoeuvre, the first flown inverted with -G. And despite the low airspeed, the Extra 330's high-lift wing and enormous ailerons still enable the aircraft to transition into a perfectly controlled sequence of rolls before performing a second Cobra, this time with +G. Again, rolling, and then continuing to climb, demonstrating the immense power of the Lycoming AEIO 580 B1A, producing 315 horsepower, as Florent now transitions into a high-alpha prop hang. One of Florent's specialities is to dive towards the crowd and then initiate a hard outside turn to avoid the spectators, and that's coming up any second now. Look at that, -8G, and that is by far and away the most impressive bit of -G flying that I've ever seen at an air show. Now a demonstration of the Extra 330's fantastic roll rate, 420 degrees per second. With a bit more -G, of course. And with that, I'm sure you can understand why this man is now the reigning double world aerobatic champion. A similarly exuberant flying style from the crew of this unassuming little helicopter, the EC-120 Calliope. It was designed as the replacement for the Gazelle, and over 700 of them have been built since it first flew in 1995.
Pour parler de l'hélicoptère H07E07, et là maintenant c'est assuré par Solidax, qui est un partenaire public et unique en France. Cela fait 10 ans que les stagiaires sont formés sur cet aéronef de nouvelle génération.
It's used as a training aircraft by the armed forces of 7 nations, but it has also found use as a police helicopter and air ambulance around the world. This example is owned by civilian company Helidax. Helidax has a fleet of 36 EC-120s used for basic rotary wing training by the French Air and Space Force, Army, Navy and Gendarmerie. Everything we've seen so far flew as part of a morning teaser display, but the main flying programme started just after lunch, and it began with an impressive show opener. First up, the parachute team of the French Air and Space Force took to the air aboard an Antonov An-2. Then the departure of no fewer than 10 T-6 Texans and Harvards. Team Phoenix performed a 4-person jump, with 3 jumpers demonstrating canopy relative work and the other carrying a very large French flag.
Mon lieutenant, ce drapeau, il est absolument énorme. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous parler des dimensions? Oui, alors c'est un drapeau en
And as soon as they were on the ground, the 10 Texans flew through in a sequence inspired by the warbird mass formation arrivals seen at EAA AirVenture in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. French Army Light Aviation made a very notable contribution to the flying programme this year and provided 2 displays that we've never featured on airshow dispatches before. First up, their NH-90 Cayman helicopter. The NH-90 first flew in 1995, and it was originally intended to be the de facto pan-NATO multi-role transport helicopter for the 21st century. This didn't really come to fruition. Many NATO states chose not to purchase the NH-90, and plenty of those who did experienced such poor reliability and high operating costs that they decided to retire the aircraft almost immediately. The French Army has escaped the worst of the problems. They have around 60 NH-90s on strength, which they have designated the Cayman. Despite its serviceability problems, the NH90 remains a highly advanced helicopter. Its composite construction, diamond-shaped hull and exhaust suppression systems make it one of the least detectable helicopters in its class, both in terms of its infrared signature and its radar cross-section.
Et parlons également de l'équipage qui commande l'équipage de basse personnel en chef de bord avec la capacité opérationnelle sur 15
The French Army's EC-665 Tiger solo display is a very rare sight at airshows, which is a shame because this is a fantastic airshow performance. Much like the NH90, the Tiger has not proved universally popular with its customers, but France has again escaped the worst of the problems, and they operate a fleet of 67 aircraft for close air support and escort missions. They are fitted with a nose-mounted 30mm cannon and can carry 68mm Sneb unguided rockets, 20mm machine cannons or Mistral air-to-air missiles. France's Tigers have been upgraded several times and have recently been retrofitted with uprated engines to improve their performance in hot and high environments. A forthcoming upgrade will allow the Tiger to carry guided rockets and anti-tank missiles. One of the Tiger's most impressive capabilities from an airshow perspective is its unusually fast yaw rate, which will be very shortly demonstrated. Pitch rate too is impressive, as shown during some of these noseovers. But we've saved the best manoeuvre until last, because now it's time for the Tiger to roll on its back. The last military display for the time being comes to us from the French Air and Space Force. It's the two PC-21s of Mustang X-Ray.
autant de qualité recherchée par les sauveteurs chez leurs élèves.
Mustang X-Ray was created in 2021 at the French Air Force's main flying school at Cognac. It is, in many ways, the spiritual successor to the school's defunct aerobatic team Cartouche Dorée, which flew the TB-30 Epsilon. Their show is a halfway house between aerobatic team and roll demonstration, with some very photogenic opposition manoeuvres. France selected the PC-21 to replace the Alpha Jet in the advanced jet training role. With a top speed of 370 knots, it's the fastest turboprop ever to enter mass production, making it a worthy successor to the Alpha Jet in terms of flight characteristics.
Devant vous pour le croisement dans quelques instants. Et croisement pas
But the PC-21 is far more than a fast turboprop. It is, in effect, an airborne flight simulator, capable of creating digital friends and foes, complete with data sharing and simulated weapon systems, all within the confines of the aircraft's onboard computers.
Dans le cadre de cette démonstration de police du ciel, un avion va jouer le rôle de Il y a donc un dialogue qui va se mettre en place.
This allows trainee pilots to fly complex multi-aircraft battles, even while they're the only plane in the sky. Here, the two PC-21s demonstrate a pop-up attack, arriving at low level to evade radar detection before climbing to acquire a target and quickly diving again for cover.
Messieurs, c'était Scott, le leader de l'Union Mustang, qui se rendez-vous dans quelques instants après l'atterrissage du podium. Mesdames et messieurs, le dernier passage du distance space XL. On lève les mains, dans la voie. Les Mustang XL, messieurs. Et nous observons actuellement le break tactique qui va permettre aux Mustang XL de revenir se poser ici à Melun avec un passage.
From Switzerland, we enjoyed the wonderful Classic Formation team, who presented their usual display of beautifully organised chaos with a C-47 Skytrain and 3 C-45 Expediters. It's not often that you see a group of historic transport aircraft flying quite like this.
On s'est rendu compte de l'importance de la troisième dimension pendant la Première Guerre mondiale et ensuite.
After several passes as a four-ship, each one in a different formation shape, the group splits up, with one of the C-45s adopting the role of a soloist.
Quasiment 3 ans.
Et alors qu'on a vu cette piste de virage, qui n'a presque rien dans un avion de chasse moderne.
The C-45 is the basic military transport version of the Beech 18, a multi-role aircraft built in enormous numbers between 1937 and 1970. Beech 18s have served as training aircraft, airliners, cargo haulers, bombers, utility aircraft, reconnaissance platforms, and even as a mothership for target drones. In fact, we'll see one of those specialised variants of the Beech 18 flying later on in the programme. Here, a spectacular crossover, as the solo C-45 flies through the middle of the rest of the formation, which then splits to the left and right. Normally the team uses a silver DC-3 as their lead aircraft, but they were encouraged to swap it for their second example, a C-47 Skytrain in US Army Air Force colours with invasion stripes, appropriate in the D-Day 80th anniversary year. The last of the novelty acts was Richard Goodwin in his one-of-a-kind jet-powered pit special. This aircraft is almost entirely non-standard, with bespoke high-performance wings, enlarged control surfaces, a highly tuned Lycoming AEIO 540 piston engine, and 2 Lynx turbojets. The result is an aircraft with a thrust-to-weight ratio in the region of 1:1. Here, a demonstration of its power and pitch authority with a microloop. Next, the first of the hovering manoeuvres. In the hover, there is nothing to stop the torque of the engine from causing the aircraft to enter a slow, uncontrollable rotation. So to give the impression of hovering, Rich is going to fly into wind with around 15 knots of forward speed at a very high angle of attack. This maintains just enough airflow over the ailerons for Rich to be able to counter the tendency of the aircraft to enter a torque roll. Now, the tower of power. Aileron rolls, flick rolls, and then a torque roll, all merged together into a single manoeuvre. And this is what happens if Rich really lets the aircraft come to a hover. It starts to rotate, much like a helicopter without a tail rotor. The jet engines have a high fuel burn and will consume all of their fuel in a little over 10 minutes. As the aircraft gets lighter during the course of the display, its performance only becomes more impressive. The finale is an incredible vertical departure, the sort of thing that we'd usually expect to see from an afterburning frontline fighter. After the jet pits, it was time for the warbird displays to begin in earnest. First up, two Fieseler Storks, although one of them is technically an imposter, a Melun MS505 Criquet in fancy dress. The Stork was a German liaison and observation aircraft used from 1936 until 1945, famous for its exceptionally low stall speed of less than 30 knots. After the war, the French military used a mix of captured aircraft and new-build versions produced by Melun, and they were used operationally during the Indochina War and the Algerian War. The French-built examples had new engines and used aluminium rather than wood for the wings, but they retained the original Stork's impressive low-speed performance. One of the rarest aircraft at Air Legend 2024 was this AT-11 Kansan from Luftraum Süd in Germany. It was flown here by Corey Wells and Robert Haag. The AT-11 was a variant of the Beech 18, and it served as the primary bombing trainer for the US Army Air Force during the Second World War. In fact, around 90% of American wartime bombardiers trained on the AT-11. Around 1,600 were built in total, and although export orders were placed, those aircraft were requisitioned by the US military and never saw foreign service. The most obvious modification compared to a standard Beech 18 is the transparent nose, where a Norden bomb sight will be fitted. The aircraft were also equipped with 2 small bomb bays and an internal bomb rack. They could also be fitted out for gunnery training. Air Legend 2024 paid tribute to the 80th anniversary of D-Day with a display by this CC-129 Dakota, complete with fighter escort. This particular aircraft, however, did not take part in D-Day. It was built in 1945 and fitted out with a VIP interior, a cabin that it retains to this day, and it was used regularly to transport Queen Elizabeth II. It flew with the US Army Air Force, then the Royal Air Force as a Dakota Mark IV, and finally the Royal Canadian Air Force as a CC-129. Her civilian career has seen her move between France and Canada several times, and it's flown as a civilian airliner as recently as the 1980s. After the Dakota finished its solo display, it was the turn of the Spitfire, a PR-14 photo reconnaissance variant from the W Air collection, flown here by Brice Ohéon. The Spitfire 14 was the second operational Mark of Spitfire to be fitted with a Rolls-Royce Griffon 65 engine, producing 2,050 horsepower rather than a Rolls-Royce Melun. It was also the first Griffon-powered Mark to have a two-stage supercharger. This gave the Mark 14 far better high-altitude performance than any Spitfire had enjoyed before, a top speed of 350 knots and an astonishing climb rate of 5,000 feet per minute. Although the Mark 14 gave the Spitfire a new lease of life, like any new aircraft variant, it had a few minor teething problems. Pilots used to the Merlin-powered Spitfire variants found that the Mark 14 could be quite a handful and took some getting used to, and a tendency for the wing and fuselage skin to wrinkle in certain locations led the RAF to clip the wings of many Mark 14s to reduce the phenomenon, a decision which improved performance yet further in some flight regimes, but which cost the Mark 14 Spitfire its distinctive elliptical wing shape. The Yak-3 could be regarded as the Spitfire 14's Russian equivalent. In fact, of those lucky pilots privileged enough to fly both types, several reported that the Yak was the Spitfire's equal, if not its superior. Introduced in 1994, the Yak-3 had an immediate and devastating impact on the Luftwaffe over the Eastern Front. Small groups of Yak-3s were consistently able to outperform much larger groups of German fighters, and within a matter of weeks, Luftwaffe air activity virtually halted on the parts of the front where Yak-3s prowled. Air Legend this year brought together two examples of the P-40E Warhawk, a P-40N from France Flying Warbirds and a P-40E from Fast Aero in Belgium.
de 400
After a few formation passes, the P-40E broke off for a solo display. This is a very special P-40, not least because it's a World War II combat veteran. It was sent to Russia in 1942 as part of the Lend-Lease programme and was used to defend the Kola Peninsula and the port city of Murmansk. Unfortunately, within just a few weeks, it was shot down and sank to the bottom of Lake Obozero. The aircraft was finally recovered in 1997 and became the subject of a stop-start restoration project that lasted over 2 decades and spanned several different countries: the USA, New Zealand, Italy and Belgium. It finally returned to flight earlier this year.
Et ensuite il sera largement détrôné dans le cadre de la bataille du Pacifique par le Justement, les États-Unis se sont tournés vers les États-Unis savoir si on pouvait acheter ces avions. Là, l'histoire devient encore plus belle. Et le P-40 a malheureusement, grâce au cause de North American, connu un très faible de reconnaissance notamment. C'est l'histoire. C'est l'histoire.
Another Second World War duo now, a pair of F4U Corsairs. The lead aircraft is from the Amical Jean-Baptiste Salis and is flown by Edmond Salis. Behind it, a Corsair operated by the German collection Flying Legends, flown by George Raab. After a couple of energetic formation passes, Baptiste Salis performed a short solo sequence of no more than a couple of minutes, before George Raab commenced a far more extensive solo display. This is the last surviving Corsair to have seen service in the Korean War. In Korea, the Corsair was used mainly in the close air support role, but also for ground attack and anti-armour missions. With the advent of the first jet fighters, and particularly the very lightweight MiG-15, the Corsair soon found itself outmatched. It could just about outmaneuver a MiG in a twisting, turning dogfight, but in terms of speed, acceleration and climb performance, there really was no contest. This is not an aeroplane that's been seen in public very much over the past decade, but Flying Legends purchased it from another owner, Max Alpha Aviation, last year, and since entering their stewardship, it has become far more active on the airshow circuit. The focus of the flying display now shifted to the post-war era, and next up came the Vampire FB6, representing the second British jet fighter to enter service. Although development began back in 1941, the Vampire became operational slightly too late to see Second World War service. The Lockheed P-80 was the first operational American jet fighter, and that in turn was developed into the T-33 Shooting Star twin-seat trainer. T-33s were manufactured under license in Canada, where they were called the CT-133 Silver Star. This version, a Silver Star Mark III variant, was fitted with a Rolls-Royce Nene engine rather than the standard Allison J33, which gave the aircraft more power and superior performance. This Silver Star is operated by Top Gun Voltige, a flight experience company based in western France which also operates a TB-30, Gamebird, Stearman and L-39. It's flown here by former Breitling jet team pilot Bernard Charbonnel. The Flying Bulls participated in various display slots throughout the day, but their warbird aerobatic routine proved to be a star item as always. In the lead, the collection's P-38L Lightning, the only Lightning flying in Europe, flown by Raymond Reidman. It's flanked by an F4U Corsair flown by Eric Goujon and a P-51D Mustang in the hands of Eskil Amdahl. The P-38 was a highly advanced fighter for its day, and it raised the bar in terms of range and high-altitude performance. In the photo reconnaissance role, P-38s were responsible for 90% of the images captured by US forces in the European theatre. In the Pacific, the P-38 was credited with destroying more Japanese aircraft than any other Allied fighter type. In another notable mission, P-38s were used to assassinate the Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the man responsible for the attack on Pearl Harbor. P-38s equipped with drop tanks flew a mission over 400 miles long at a height of just 50 feet to avoid detection, and then caused Yamamoto's Mitsubishi G4N transport aircraft to crash in the mountains of Papua New Guinea. We'll see more of Red Bull's Corsair and Mustang later, as the show now focuses on the Korean War. Next to fly, Aero Restauration's Sea Fury FB11. The Sea Fury was one of the last great piston-powered fighters, developed during the Second World War for the Royal Air Force. With jet technology on the horizon, the RAF cancelled their order before any were delivered, and Hawker shifted development to a navalised fighter for the Fleet Air Arm, with whom it entered service in 1947. The Sea Fury performed well even against early jets like the MiG-15, and it sold both to the Fleet Air Arm and to several overseas customers. The Skyraider is of a similar vintage, being introduced to service in 1946. Although it did claim a few air-to-air kills, including 2 against the far faster and more nimble MiG-17, the Skyraider was primarily an attack aircraft. Although it's a large and relatively heavy aeroplane designed for survivability rather than manoeuvrability, in the right hands it is still an immensely impressive performer. Today, Bernard Verpillot is at the controls, and he is about to do something extraordinary. Yes, that is a partial rolling circle in a Skyraider. Next, the Skyraider joined up with the Sea Fury as well as the Corsair and Mustang from the Flying Bulls for a series of formation flybys. This quartet was known collectively as K formation, recalling the role that all four aircraft types played over the skies of Korea. The Korean War theme continued with a pair of jets. First up, Fundasza Escadra's LIM-2, the Polish license-built version of the MiG-15 bis. The MiG-15 was powered by a Russian version of the Rolls-Royce Nene, which had been acquired and reverse-engineered by the Soviets. They called it the Klimov VK-1. But because the MiG-15 was smaller than its Western counterparts, and lighter as it hadn't been fitted with an ejection seat, MiG-15s were able to climb and accelerate faster than anything the West had to offer, and soon they were shooting down American jets over the skies of Korea. This is the second MiG-15 to be operated by the Fundasza Escadra, and it was restored to flight in 2021. Other Mikoyan jet fighters are also on the way, with a LIM-5, the Polish version of the MiG-17, due to fly sometime next year. One of the MiG's main rivals in Korea was the F-86 Sabre, the first American swept-wing fighter. Although the MiG was still superior to the early versions of the Sabre, the American jet was extensively improved upon, and soon it became a formidable opponent. The aircraft we see here is the ultimate iteration of the Sabre, a Canadian license-built CL-13B Mark VI. It's powered by an Avro Canada Arenda turbojet, which gives it far more power than any of the Sabres built in America. This aircraft is owned and flown by Fred Ackery. He's been a warbird pilot for many years, but he comes from a competition aerobatics background, and that certainly shows in his displays, which are peppered with fast, precise aileron rolls. Fred firmly believes that the Sabre Mark VI is the best possible warbird to fly recreationally, and he particularly praises its roll performance, which matches that of several much more modern jets, such as the F-18 Hornet. Arguably the headliner of the show was the Flying Bull's DC-6B. This, the organisers believe, was the first time that a DC-6 has flown at a French airshow for at least 30 years. This is the only airworthy DC-6 in Europe. The Flying Bulls call it the crowning jewel of their fleet. It's got an illustrious history because this aeroplane was built in 1958 and used initially by the state-owned Yugoslavian airline JAT. It then became the personal aircraft of Yugoslav President Josip Broz Tito, and then in 1975 it was sold to the Zambian head of state, Kenneth Kaunda. Next, a quartet of Fougueux Magistères from Patouille-Tranchant, who were about to fly an absolutely balletic performance in stunning late afternoon light. Patouille-Tranchant harks back to a bygone age when the Patrouille de France flew this unusual butterfly-tailed jet trainer. Initially, the national team flew 6 of them, but at times they grew as large as 11 aircraft, bigger than any jet aerobatic team in the world today. The Magistère first flew in 1952. Nearly 1,000 of them were built, with licensed production taking place in Israel, Germany and Finland, and they served with a total of 21 air forces. That includes flying for a number of national aerobatic teams, including Ireland's Silver Swallows, Belgium's Red Devils and the Israel aerobatic team, plus, of course, the Patrouille de France. Flying in the slot position and acting as Patouille-Tranchant's solo pilot is the lusciously mustachioed 80-year-old pilot Jacques Crine, a real veteran of the Patrouille de France's Magistère era. He flew with the team from 1967 until 1978. This is not a display of high-octane aerobatics. In Jacques' own words, it's not a case of flying, rather a matter of dancing. Providing quite a change of pace, the French Air and Space Force closed the show with their A400M tactical display. The A400M is the French Air and Space Force's largest transport aircraft, with a payload of 37 tons. It's a strategic airlifter with roughly double the capacity of the C-130, but it also has some impressive tactical airlift capability, including best-in-class stall performance and the ability to operate from austere runways. To meet its performance requirements, the A400M had to be fitted with specially developed Europrop TP400 engines, the most powerful turboprop engine ever produced at the time of its inception. This gives the A400M double the power of the C-130H Hercules. Now, a very impressive wing over at 120 degrees of bank. This rounds out our look back at Air Legend 2024, a show that was not at times quite in the spirit of Air Legends of old, but that did not detract from the spectacle in the slightest. It remains immensely enjoyable. Join us next time from one of the world's great aviation spectacles, the International Sanicol Airshow in Belgium. Until then, from me, Adam Landau, it's goodbye for now.